Ladies and gentlemen, in just a moment you are going to hear the voice of a man who will tell you some tremendously important facts, some amazing facts. The voice of a man who has made a discovery that is revolutionizing human thought, changing human lives, bringing happiness and success where discontent and failure were before.
Welcome to the Reality Revolution. I'm your host, Brian Scott. Today we're going to talk a little bit about reincarnation through the lens of Lao Russell, the wife of Walter Russell, who wrote a book called You Cannot Die, which discusses life after death and reincarnation. There's a lot of good material in it, and I really haven't dedicated an episode to reincarnation. This is not necessarily going to cover all of the different aspects of it. I think it's pretty well covered with the Law of One material. But if you're like me, you still doubt if it's true, how you can prove it, and death is just one of those questions we constantly always have. I really like the way that Lao Russell discusses it. Who knows? There is no way for us to totally know except through our own consciousness, a vision, an awakening, an experience, a memory, a remembering. Other than that, it's speculation, it's looking at nature, and a variety of other things. Once I had read the Walter Russell material and understanding the way that he explains God and the living universe, it sort of helped me understand it a little bit more. I think that Lao Russell is sort of a translator of Walter Russell's more difficult material. Now, I recommend reading the whole book, You Cannot Die, and there's a lot of great chapters, and we will come back to it, but I wanted to go over just a couple chapters that really are dedicated to the idea that you cannot die, that life alone is. It's a good starting point for us to talk about it. It's possible that we're not really reincarnating when we're having memories. We're actually just experiencing a memory in the Akashic, and that we have experienced all the lives. The Law of One material would maybe indicate that that's a possibility. But it's also possible that we're individualized and that we have individual lives that we experience that are different than others. Some people believe that when we have a memory of a past life, we're actually just experiencing a past life that is in the information field. And then you have the whole Neville Goddard material, which is even more different, which correlates with the Swedenborg idea that we come back in different timelines and possibly different dimensions. There's a lot of different aspects to it. I am always asking these questions because I want to know. I love life and I want to live forever. And I want to know that beyond this life, there's more to it because there's so much more. We live in just a blink of an eye, and it just feels like there's something more to it. Now, I believe with memories and ideas and experiences with my higher self, I believe strongly that I have lived other lives. My higher self has given me this impression that I don't want to know about them. And in many ways, why would we want to know? It would be debilitating for us to have the information of our past lives. It would be very, very difficult to properly operate in this existence if we had the accumulated memory of all these past lives. But there may be a point where we do have that. Maybe we're preparing ourselves for that. So let's just get this perspective and we can discuss it further from here. Life alone is. There is no death. We have arrived at the point where a simple practical talk about life and death will help to give you a very different concept of your body and the whole universe of bodies. The purpose of this talk is to demonstrate how man can at last conquer death by proving to him there is no death in all this universe. The effect which man calls death causes a great but needless fear and dread of its coming, and fear of the unknown destiny of the dead exists in man only because the hereafter is not known. That also will disappear forever when knowledge of the hereafter displaces the now unknown. Another purpose of this talk is to further acquaint you with the one supreme fact that you cannot sever your unity with God for 1/1,000,000th of a second during your visible or invisible life. The more you comprehend this fact, the more you will develop God awareness in your consciousness. And the more you develop God awareness, the more you will hear God's silent voice whispering within you. Likewise, greater and greater familiarity with that power will convince you of the naturalness of talking consciously and comprehensively with God. The first step toward dissipating the idea of death by demonstrating that death has no existence in this eternally living universe is to prove to your satisfaction that what we call death is but one of the two directions which transient living bodies like yours and mine make use of in manifesting the idea of eternal life. Let us give you a simple example. Look out the window of your darkened room on a pitch dark, cloudless, starless night. As you thus peer into infinite invisible space, you see no movement anywhere. You see nothing, in fact. Everything before your eyes is motionless, or lifeless, and changeless according to your thinking. There is utter stillness everywhere. You see no life in that stillness, but can you say that this invisible stillness is dead? No, you cannot, for you know that all bodies of living matter emerge from that invisible stillness and are swallowed up by it, as physicists describe it. Before we consider the next example, ask yourself the following question. Am I thinking that there is no life in that stillness because I cannot see anything moving or changing in it? Now look again into space on a clear night. You now see moving, changing bodies of light out there, thousands of them, and perhaps a few clouds are scurrying across the night sky, chased by the winds. And you see hundreds of people in the streets below. Every one of those stars, planets, moons, and clouds are pulsing, living bodies. Their pulsing is motivated by the same pulsing force which motivates your heartbeat and the heartbeat of the people down there in the streets. They are therefore as living as your body is living, and they move and change and die just as your body moves, changes, and dies. Now ask yourself the following questions. Am I thinking that the bodies which I see are living because they are moving and changing? If these living, moving, changing bodies emerged from the stillness of blank space, is it logical for me to believe that living bodies could emerge from a condition of death? In other words, is it logical to think that living bodies can emerge from dead space? Is it not more logical to think that motionless, changeless stillness might be eternally alive, and that bodies of changing, moving matter which emerge from it and return to it for reemergence may just be simulating life or dramatizing the idea of life? If life emerges from stillness to manifest life by moving, is it not illogical to say that the life which emerges is something else than life when it returns to stillness? If I emerge from my house, am I someone else or something else when I return? Is it logical to say that I am alive when I come out and dead when I go in? I had to move when I came out, and I had to move when I went in. As we again look out into the vastness of universal space, we ask a physicist to explain to us how material living bodies emerge from space and return to it. And he replies, no one knows how these dynamic bodies emerge from static space, but we do know that living bodies which have emerged from space are compressing, and dead or dying bodies which are returning are expanding. This answer sets you into a deep meditative mood. You go out into your fields and sit upon a great rock at the edge of the woods to think it over. A learned physicist has told you that the condition of motion, which is called compression, is life, and the condition of motion, which is called expansion, is death. That is really something to think about and to reason about as you think. What are those two conditions of motion, you ask yourself? The compressive motion is inward, toward solidity, and the expansive motion is outward toward static nothingness, you answer. Both are conditions of motion and both are equal, you reason. In your meditation, it suddenly occurs to you that both of these conditions and opposite directions of motion are equally dependent upon each other. The compression-expansion pump in your factory is powerless to express life if it is still, but it will immediately express life and power by dividing that stillness into two opposed directions of motion, one which compresses and the other which expands. Both directions must be present, you reason. Why, therefore, should one direction be called life and the other direction be called death, you ask. You recall that one day your foreman told you that the pump was dead. He meant it, that it would not move. To make it live, therefore, there must be two opposing pressure conditions and two opposed directions of motion in it in order that the dynamic condition called life could emerge from the still condition called death. To create that dynamic condition, a spark of light must ignite a fuel gas. You again recall what the physicist told you about a compressed condition being necessary for the creation of life and an expanded one for decay unto death. You recall that a spark of visible light is created by compressing invisible light. You have seen that done by winding a spiral coil of wire and sending an electric current through it. It needs a compressed condition of light, therefore, to expand a fuel gas, and that expansion is necessary to compress a cylinder of your motor for the accumulation of power. Reflection upon this idea brings your reasoning process to the conclusion that both conditions of compression and expansion are equally contributive to the condition we call life. If that is true, your physicist's teachings were not true. Likewise, your gardener's oft-repeated slogan, which says that the out of death comes life, is also not true. You remember how often you have heard him say that when he generously manured the garden with decaying animal humus. This brings up another point during your meditation upon the subject. You again recall that your engineer foreman told you that the motor of your pump was dead, and you again ask, why is it dead? It is dead because it cannot move. It cannot move because it has no heartbeat pulsing within it. In other words, it is dead because it is still. Is that a satisfactory answer? You do not think so. For space is still, yet all dynamic life comes out of it. Space cannot possibly be dead, otherwise life could not emerge from it. Suddenly a great light dawns upon you like a flash of light from the cosmos, which invariably comes to those who meditate deeply upon a thought, in deep desire for its solution, which really means talking with God about it. This flash of light from the cosmos tells you that the invisible still light of space is eternal life, from which the moving dynamic light emerges and returns to manifest eternal life in eternal repetitions of compression, expansion, wave pulsations. This flash from the blue inspires you with a feeling of greater closeness to the universal intelligence, which you are becoming more and more aware of as the omnipresent one mind, creator of the universe. You rejoice in having your desire for knowledge fulfilled in this blissful manner of awakening you to the fact that you already have all knowledge within you, and the assurance that it will reveal its presence within you only by the asking, coupled with deep desire and forgetfulness of body. In thus thinking, you recall that the Supreme Illuminate of all time said, God is life. You now understand what he meant by eternal life, for as he is eternal, the life which he is could be naught other than eternal. That clarifies the phenomenon which we think of as life as God's thinking. For his thinking is divided into pairs, which must unite to become one, and so is the light, which God is, divided into spectrum pairs. This fact accounts for waves of divided light of which the universe is composed, for there is no other thing in this vast universe but waves of light, which emerge from their fulcrum, zeros, and disappear into them in endless repetitions forever and forever. Thus thinking, you see what man calls life in a new light. You see it as the manner in which God manifests the idea of light and eternal life by dividing his one idea into countless pairs of many seemingly separate ideas, for that is what vibrating light waves are. How much more logical and comprehensible the universe is when you view it as a simulation of reality instead of reality, just as you view a drama upon life's stage, except that you and all the universe of objective things are the actor in God's drama of love. You now recall words written in other chapters which state that all actions and reactions of motion in this light wave universe are divided by periods of rest and oblivion to even an awareness of existence. That makes you think of these periods of rest in sleep which divide your days of dynamic action. Such periods of rest cannot possibly be death, even though they do symbolize and simulate death. Your common sense tells you that you are just as much alive and have just as much power when you have no awareness of existence as when you have full awareness of it and can manifest that awareness in action. Is that fact not true of everything you see about you? Across the river, you see great 100-ton boulders on the steep slant of earth above the forest. Those boulders have been lying there inert for centuries. But desire could give them so mighty a push, they could tear the forest apart as they avalanche toward the river and manifest their living power through motion, whereas there was no evidence of this dynamic possibility while not in motion. Looking about you, you see motion and rest everywhere. In fact, more of rest is evident in your peaceful hills than motion. You even feel your whole body to be at rest, but you know that violent actions are taking place within it to express life and power. Is it not equally true that when you sleep and while your body is resting, parts of it are working violently? Your heart is pumping all of the blood in your body through it every few minutes. Between every pulsation of movement, there is a period of stillness, which divides every compression-expansion sequence. You can now knowingly say that the power expressed in motion is not really in the motion, but is in the stillness, which divides motion. As your lungs breathe in and then breathe out, they are similarly divided by a period of rest. And your growing intuition tells you that the power expressed in either of the two ways of motion is not in the motion, but in the stillness which divides the motion. Also, if life is in motion and motion has two opposite directions, how can one logically say that one way is life and the other way is death? That is true. Life itself, which is presumed to be motion, must have its source in eternal rest. If death is presumed to be non-motion and life is dependent upon it to express life, the only possible conclusion is that life is two ways, and that which man calls death is one of these two ways, both of which have their source in rest. It therefore follows that the energy, which your textbooks tell you is in matter, must logically be in its source in rest. Matter cannot motivate itself. Try it. Your body is composed of matter. It cannot move until your mind tells it to move. Neither can the organs of your body move until the God's mind tells them to move by instinctive control. They also are simulating power, which in their motion actually is extended to them from the state of perpetual rest upon which all of your body activities are based. You are cumulatively thinking more and more that the power which matter seems to possess is not in God's thought waves of motion at all, but in the stillness of his knowing. Even the pencil in your hand tells you that you know that it is made up of whirling atoms of violent motion which revolve around still centers. Even as our planet and sun are similarly constructed, if the power within the stillness which holds the pencil together were suddenly released, it could kill you instantly, yet that power does not move, nor will it ever move. Every animate and inanimate thing you see within your whole scope of vision tells you the same story of power within stillness everywhere, and the helplessness of things to move without stillness for their springboard to help them move. Over on the lawn, your children are playing seesaw. Up and down they go, sitting upon a board which is supported in its middle by a pivot, which acts as its fulcrum. As you watch them, you realize that all of that motion and seeming power would be impossible were it not for that one still point of its fulcrum. Where, therefore, does the power and dynamic energy of life come from, which your children seem to possess? It is certainly not in them, nor is it in the board, for neither of them could move an inch of it, were not for that still fulcrum from which the lever arms, which the board represents, are extended. Also, neither child could move at all unless the other one simultaneously moved in the opposite direction. It is plainly evident that the source of power thus expressed is in the stillness of the invisible light, which is omnipresent in the universe and not in moving bodies. If therefore omnipotence, omniscience, and omnipresence reside in the stillness of invisible space, what else is there in all the universe? There can be but one answer, and that answer is motion. And the time will come in the unfoldment of man when his inner sensory perception will equal his outer sensory perception. When that time comes, he will know that motion only seems but has no existence. Even before that time comes, growing intelligence will make it possible for man to comprehend this great cosmic illusion, although he cannot yet know it. Present-day man's senses do not permit him to perceive the simultaneously voiding motion which cancels out the one they do see. In our new science of tomorrow, teachings are these words of a new law for tomorrow, which read, every action-reaction in nature is voided as it occurs, is recorded as it is voided, and is repeated as it is recorded. This is God's universe of his one idea of light, love, and life. That is the one thing in God's mind except desire of mind to manifest that idea in the work of thinking in waves of light which motivate the universe. God's life is eternal, undivided, and unchanging, but his thoughts and imaginings are perpetually divided and changing, and so is the life of the imagined ideas which constitute perpetually divided and changing imaginings. They're also repetitive. Every imagined idea perpetually repeats itself as imagined ideas grow to their maturities. You are one unit of one idea of God's imaginings. God imagined you and created you in the image of his imaginings. What applies to you applies to all creation. You think and imagine the same way and with the same mind that God thinks with. You can think great ideas and build bodies in the form of your imaginings, but no matter what you build, the power which built them and the intelligence which conceived them is in you and not in the bodies you build. The time has come when unfolding man should recognize this fact and place knowledge and power in the creator of universal bodies and not in the bodies. Until the illusion of death, which so permeates the consciousness of man, is clarified and the principle of two-way life is thoroughly comprehended, this could not be fully understood. Nor could it be understood if the ages-long mystery of the soul and the purposes of the inert gases in nature and their relation to the soul is not lifted out of the dark and brought fully into the light. Present-day concept would expect this heading to be written as life, death, and the resurrection instead of life, rest, and the resurrection. When man's growing intelligence enables him to comprehend God's way of working to construct bodies, he will find that there is no death in the universe, and what he thinks of as death is but rest, which divides the work periods of creation, which man thinks of as life. Is it not more than probable that the fundamentals of all present-day concepts of the universe are as primitive as the present stage of our civilization is primitive? If this were not so, why are there hundreds of thousands of seekers for truth who are now rising above the mass intelligence stage to find answers to the ever-growing tumult within their souls, which forever cry for more and more God awareness and more knowledge of their inner selves? The vastly increasing number of these seekers encourages the belief that the cosmic age may be nearer than we suspect. Why do these strange concepts of death and of heaven as a place we go to when we die persist in a society which has advanced so far in the material science of effect, but so little in the spiritual science of cause? Why is transient matter so much more important to science than its eternal cause? In other words, why does man consider his transient body more important than his eternal soul identity with God? And lastly, why does man still hold the concept that riches consist of gold and other possessions of his body, which he cannot take with him into eternity, rather than soul qualities, which he can take with him for his eternal use in every future life? Here is a thought upon which you can spend long hours in meditation. All matter in the universe, including all suns and all planets, does not occupy 1,000 trillionth of space in what we call our universe. Our little planet is 30 million miles away from its nearest neighbor, and our sun is 9 light years away from its nearest star. We think of them as solid bodies, but each atom of them is separated from its neighbor by relatively vast fields of space. Man even thinks of his body as solid, but that too is largely space. When we say that stars are light years away from each other, we do that because the distances are so great. They cannot have any meaning when stated as miles. There could be too many zeros in the total figure, and it would have no dynamic meaning. When you think of the speed at which light seemingly travels as 186,400 miles per second, and then multiply that by an hour, then a day, then a year, you can better realize how empty the universe is. When you also realize that the wave pulsations, which record God's thoughts in light of matter, number somewhere near 600 billion billions of a second, you can better conceive the vast amount of work necessary to bring so very little visible light into so vast an invisible infinity. In the science of tomorrow, man will be able to look upon matter for what it is, as visible evidence of work performed by the thinking mind of the Creator in the vast space around it, as the eternal state of rest between the Creator's work periods. Jesus, the greatest scientist who ever lived, being endowed with cosmic omniscience, tried to tell the still primate people of his day the meaning of it all. He spoke in symbols and in words for future comprehension, the true meanings of which are not comprehended even by present-day standards of intelligence. For the purpose of this book, I will define one of his mystic or symbolic teachings and give it its true meaning. The words of these teachings are the most familiar words in most languages of the earth. These are the words, "Our Father which art in heaven." Scientifically stated, he was describing God as that universal equilibrium or state of rest, which science describes as the static universe from which the dynamic universe of action emerges. Take note that he did not personalize God by using the word who, he said which, to indicate the creative mind at rest. Hallowed be thy name. Think of the immensity of measure in the symbolism of those 4 words. The very word hallowed means to make holy, to worship or consecrate. It has in it the connotation of the word halo, which is that glory of light that we see around such celestial objects as the moon or sun at times when the atmosphere favors it. It also symbolizes the nimbus, by which medieval painters used to signify holy ones in sacred paintings. Jesus used the word to glorify God as the one light of the universe. Thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. These are the volumes of scientific meaning in these few words. Thy will be done in earth means God's mind desire for manifestation of the God principle of love to be fulfilled in earth, meaning the action of work as it is in heaven, meaning its eternal reality at rest as idea in God's mind. These 2 phrases of the Lord's Prayer very plainly tell of the 2 interchanging states of rest and of work which constitute the universe, as God does but one thing, which is to think the idea of light and love into forms which manifest his eternal life in cycles of thought and simulate life by pulsing sequences. All such pulsing actions are work performed in creating the forms of his imaginings. God's work, therefore, is the creation of all the bodies in this universe by thinking them into existence for the purpose of manifesting his one idea of love on earths through action, to simulate the reality of heaven on all the earths of creation. If God's sole work consists of thinking, and if the universe of material bodies is solely the product of thought, and if thought is expressed in waves of light, the universe should properly be defined as a thought wave universe. If that is true, it necessarily follows that God's identity is not projected into the material bodies which result from his thinking. His knowledge, imagination, power, or any other God quality are not in matter. They cannot be, else we could say that the product of man's work is his identity, his mind, his intelligence, and his energy. But man says and believes that his body is his self, his identity, intelligence, and other qualities. If he did not thoroughly believe this, he would never need to ask, "Where do I go when I die?" And present-day science also says and believes that energy is in matter, and that the various energies of matter are interchangeable. That is like saying that a man who built a house has endowed the house with the intelligence and the effort of energy which he put into it. Factually, the house has none of these qualities, not even the work of it, but the work was performed by the man, not by the house. All that the house can claim for itself is that it is a record of the intelligence and effort that man put into it. There is no mystery regarding the basic nature of the bodies God creates, for it is now common knowledge that all matter is light. There is also no mystery about the only tools made use of to create bodies, for it is now common knowledge that waves of light are those tools. It is also common knowledge that rhythmic wave sequences of light divide the invisible static white light of space into pairs of visible lights of the color spectrum. This much is basic of what is already known, the most important principle in the construction of matter, which never seems to be mentioned in connection with divided wave pairs. When action and equal opposite reaction are mentioned, is the period of rest which divides the two. That period of rest between the two work pulsations which simulate life in matter is the fulcrum of power from which wave levers extend. That period of rest is also the equilibrium of heaven, which Jesus referred to, and the pulsations of work, which produce bodies of matter, are what he called earth. If you give thought to this, you will realize what Jesus was endeavoring to tell unborn generations of those who would then comprehend him. There are two states of conditions in the universe: rest, the undivided, unchanging condition of stillness in which all power is, and motion, the divided, changing conditions of action and reaction, which are extended from its still centers around which they revolve in rapidly opening and closing spiral frequencies to do the work of creation. The rest periods are those fulcrum points where pairs of spirals expand and matter disappears. The work periods are those where spiral pairs close to unite and open to divide and repeat their pulsations. Where pairs of closing spirals unite, bodies like atoms or suns are formed. When fulcrums thus unite as one, the body then revolves around their fulcrum axis at an angle of 90 degrees. When complex, compressed bodies like our sun begin to expand toward their disappearance, they throw off rings which become Earths, to which they continue to give off their light to create more bodies. Great blue holes develop at their centers, surrounded by what remains of the suns. You can see such an expanded sun in the ring nebula called Lyra. Earths do likewise. You can see such rings being thrown off from Saturn. These rings become moons. Moons expand in the same manner, and so on ad infinitum. When pairs of bodies unite to seemingly become one true sphere, they are divided by equators. On one side of each equator is the red side of the spectrum, and on the other side is the blue half. A rainbow demonstrates this division, but the blue half is within and the red half is on the outer rim. The new science of tomorrow reveals that every cell and organ of your body obeys that opening and closing spiral principle. Waves do not pulsate like levers. They pulsate more like an opening and closing watch spring, or like the diaphragm of a camera would pulsate if continuously repeated. Your heartbeat pulsates that way, and the universal heartbeat also pulsates that way. There are no exceptions to this law and process anywhere, either in the microcosmic or macrocosmic ranges of matter. Nor does it matter whether the frequencies of these pulsations are 600 billion per second or the 72 per second of your own heartbeat. Nature has but one law and one process for construction of material and their continued motivation. How often do we hear the phrase "be still and know," which implies that knowledge lies within stillness? It is basically true, but its meaning is so far beyond comprehension that it is hardly more than a phrase in value. If one could actually be so still that he could sever all physical sensation from consciousness, as geniuses partially do, and as illuminates do more fully, one would then be wholly mind and would have all knowledge that mind has. That is why the teachings of Jesus always differentiated between things of earth, meaning matter, and qualities of heaven, meaning mind. That is why he tried to tell man of earth of his unity and identity with God of heaven. The mentalities of men of his day and many of our day were such that they were then and are now unable to comprehend those teachings, even though he had to use their words about life and death. When he told them that the time would come when man would conquer death, he meant that man would someday know that there is no death. Out of the low state of early man's comprehension came many concepts of heaven as a place up there above us, where people go when they die. These concepts have been supreme mysteries and worries of all mankind ever since consciousness dawned in him with his first inkling of power to reason. Life and death are still supreme mysteries, but they will dissolve with unfolding intelligence. Let us now consider some familiar facts, which will help seekers for higher knowledge to really comprehend where we go when we die in this universe, in which its only two conditions are work and rest. There is no third condition in it. In this vibrating universe of waves, there is nothing but waves which work. What else can there be but rest for the waves that work? Compression and expansion are two ways of expressing work, but both are work. Both manifest life by working. All bodies of matter express the compressed condition resulting from work. When compressed bodies expand into invisible space, they express the rest condition. Living bodies are those which are compressed, or composed, or integrated into visibility. Dead bodies are those which are expanded, or decomposed, or disintegrated into invisibility. In other words, matter is presumably living, and space, where expanded bodies go, must therefore be dead, which is absurdly illogical thinking. That is equal to saying that living bodies are created out of death, when factually transient living bodies emerge from eternally living space. They emerge from there to manifest what is there, not what is not there. There is no place anywhere in the universe to fit this strange concept of death into it. There can be no other condition in it but work, which is the compressed condition, and rest, which is the expanded condition. Neither of the two ways is cessation of work, so life cannot be attributed to compression and death to expansion. All we can say in support of such a concept is that life begins when compression begins, and death begins when expansion begins. Both are work. However, science terms them action and reaction and pronounce them to be potentially equal. If they are equal and one expresses life, how can it be said that the other expresses death? If the engine of your car stops its two-way pumping, it will not work. Habit tells you to say that it is dead. When work stops, the rest condition takes its place. Likewise, your arm would become as dead as your dead engine if it stopped working long enough. Nature will not allow anything to live unless it works. What better evidence that life and work are one is there in nature? It would not be long before your arm or leg would atrophy and wither away if you bound it so that it could not work. That is the reason why people exercise, play strenuous games like tennis or football, or swim and skate. By doing so, they are better able to manifest life by working more vigorously. They become more vital than lazy people who do not make their bodies work. Likewise, you say that you will be dead when your heart stops working. But it is not you who die, it is your body which manifests you. All the bodies of every nature return to the rest condition of their origin when they stop working. For there are but those two conditions in the universe. It will help you realize that if you throw a stone into a calm lake and watch waves arise from it to manifest the condition of work, after a short time the work condition ceases and the rest condition reappears. If you give thought to this, you will realize that the rest condition made the work condition possible. For every wave intersection with each wave axis is a point of rest, which acts as a fulcrum to give power to the wave to work for a while. Then the wave gives that power all back again to the source of its power. If you pluck a harp string, you will see and hear the same effect. You can see the vibrating waves of the harp string as motion appears from rest, and you can hear those waves when sound appears from silence. In another few seconds, however, the waves will disappear into rest and the sound will disappear into silence. You do not then say that the sound is dead when it withdraws into its womb of silence which created it, nor do you say that the wave is dead when its motion also withdraws into the stillness from which it was born into life. Your new comprehension gained from the foregoing might prompt you to ask yourself the following question. If eternal life exists in rest and dynamic life emerges from the stillness and returns to it for rest, why should we call that rest condition death? Is it not more logical to say that the work condition simulates life, but the rest condition is life? Again, I say, therefore, where does this thing men call death fit into our living universe? If rest periods between lives are death, then also the rest periods of sleep between periods of awakenings are death. So is the play the reality, or is it the playwright? Is the poem which emerges from the poet the reality, or is it the poet? Your body is the product of your mind in exactly the same sense that the temple is the product of an architect's mind. The disappearance of the temple does not mean the death of the idea of the temple. That still exists in the architect's mind. Neither is your body, your person, your identity. It cannot be. Your identity is one with God. You and your Father are one. When you knowingly think that way, you can knowingly manifest cosmic conscience and omnipotence in the measure of your knowing. Cosmic thinkers of tomorrow will know there is no death. Why not know it now and save 1,000 years? More familiar examples will help you save many of those 1,000 years. They will help you to comprehend that work, life, motion, and matter are one on earth, and that rest in the glory and ecstasy of light in love, which God is one in heaven. When you fully comprehend that rest and heaven are one, you will never again wonder where your body goes when it ceases to work, for it will go where you are and where God also is. When you fully understand that, you will then know that your mortal body is an extension of your immortal self. Your body's sole mission on earth is to do God's will on earth as it is done in heaven. In other words, your body is your messenger extended to earth to manifest the God idea of man as part of his whole idea through the action-reaction of work. But it takes a long time for your body to know that. You should rejoice, therefore, that you are on the brink of that knowledge. It will be helpful for you to know that what man calls life is two-way work, and that there is no death in all this universe. Let us consider some phenomenon of earth which will exemplify the truth of the above. Observe the farmer pumping water from his well. His arm presses down upon the pump handle from a point of stillness where it began. That pressure was the action of work. He arrives at another point when he rests before beginning the reaction of work by pulling up instead of pressing down. When he pulls up sufficiently, he rests again for a short period before repeating the downward pressure stroke. Both strokes are work. It is quite simple to understand that you would not say that one was work and that the other was something else. But the two ways of life man calls one life and the other death. Man then asks, where does death go? Is it not difficult to answer this question satisfactorily for yourself when you know that there is but life and rest from the work of life in all this universe? Consider your heartbeat in this same light. It pulses to a point of rest and again to another point of rest to manifest life by work. Your lungs do exactly the same thing when you breathe in to compress and breathe out to expand. Each is work, and each stroke of work starts from rest and returns to a point of rest. There are 2 rest points in every breath cycle and heartbeat. If rest is death, you die 72 times per minute, and parts of your body die thousands of times per second. Where does the power come from which motivates every stroke? Power to move cannot possibly come from movement. There is no other condition in the universe except stillness for it to come from. Likewise, knowledge of effect produced cannot come from the effect produced. That also must come from stillness. Creation cannot create itself from its own power. It must come from the intelligence which resides within the stillness of mind, which centers all creating bodies. It will profit you to meditate long upon this thought. All power which motivates matter is extended to it by its creator. Likewise, all power which motivates you is extended to you from the one intelligence. Also, all power which motivates your creation is extended to them from your intelligence. Creations do not create themselves, for bodies have no power or knowledge in them. Can you think of any phenomenon in nature in which this simple two-way process of work is not repeated? Think of throwing a ball against a wall, or cutting down a tree, or throwing a stone in the air, or the action-reaction of walking. In any of these examples, do you know of one where one half works and the other half does not work, or where one half is not fully dependent upon the other? When you fully realize this, you will more fully comprehend why God made mate pairs for everything in his sex-divided universe. When you are convinced that there are no exceptions to this process of creation in all nature, then you think it through until your very soul comprehends the basic fact that work and life are one, and that when one ceases, the other ceases. You will then know in your soul that you are ready for another great step, which is the meaning of life, rest, and resurrection, and their relation to each other. We will now take that step together and clarify for all time that unsolved mystery of the life principle which science has so long hopelessly searched for in a germ or primordial particle of matter. Science and laymen alike have made the solution of the great cosmic secrets impossible because of their beliefs of what is real and what simulates reality in this universe. In searching for the life principle, science handicaps itself by the general belief that life is a property of matter. Is this true? The greatest scientist who ever lived gave a truer definition of life in 3 words when he said, God is life. If that is true, life is a property of mind and not of matter. The eternal mind, which created matter, is motionless, changeless, and undivided. The reality of life must therefore be eternally still, timeless, changeless, and undivided. The reality of anything must be in its cause and not in its effect. An effect simulates its causes as a reflection, and a mirror simulates the image of the light which cast it. But no reasoning, thinking person would ever say that the reflection is the reality, for the mirror of reflection could be withdrawn, but the light of the projector could still be. The entire universe of matter and space could be properly described as one centering omnipresent light, divided into countless centering focal points throughout the universe, and each pair surrounded by mirrors into which the centering light is reflected and from which their simulated light is reflected. This description has properly described a solar system as it does the universe. It also describes each atom and corpuscular cathode ray of matter, for the invisible light of the soul and of mind centers each, extends to each, and is re-extended from each. The process thus described is the way the Creator is in constant intercommunication with every divided unit of His creation. The language in which God talks to His creations is the language of light. It is a one-way talk in comprehension for thousands of millions of years, although it is always two ways in effect. There comes a time, however, when comprehension is two-way for all mankind. But at this present time, such cosmic comprehension is limited to growing few, but which number it is hoped these writings will increase. Comprehension of reality as residing in the spirit instead of in matter will increase the number of cosmic knowers. To further this purpose, we will go out in nature together and seriously contemplate God's ways and processes which so sorely deceive man into believing that simulated life in matter and motion is the reality instead of the stillness from which it emerges. As we pause at the edge of a great forest of oaks, we are reminded of the teachings of the Nazarene who told Nicodemus that man must be born again. And Nicodemus asked how an old man could re-enter his mother's womb. The answer to this question is right here before us. Over our heads is a century-old oak. Long ago, it unfolded from a seed in the womb of earth. In that seed was the entire pattern of the whole oak, which gradually unfolded in a material form of a matter in motion to simulate the invisible record of the individual oak, which the soul seed of the oak projected into space by the pulsing process of work performed by compression-expansion sequences of action and reaction which characterize what man calls living bodies. The visible tree grew older and bigger, and man thought of it as the reality because he could see it and feel it and cut it down into timber. But there are two things which escape attention, even though conspicuously obvious. One is that the visible tree emerges from the invisible tree. The other is that the visible tree is simultaneously refolding into the invisible tree. In other words, what is now happening anywhere in the universe is simultaneously unhappening. If we may coin a word, this might be more correct, but not so clearly stated by saying everything which happens is voided as it happens. The science of today gives very little thought, if any, to this characteristic of simultaneity in nature, but our new science of tomorrow stresses that thought conspicuously in pointing out the illusory attribute of nature. Action and reaction sequentially repeated result in the phenomenon we call growth. We can see them being repeated, and our senses tell us that we are ever moving. But the invisible actions and reaction of refolding are taking place simultaneously. It will be a long time, however, before mass man is able to comprehend a universe which is standing still and only seeming to move. The present stage of human consciousness has not yet reached that cosmic stage. It would be too great a blow to man's sense of reality, for with it, he would have to comprehend that time also stands still. Its forward flow is factually canceled out by its backward flow. But that fact is for comprehension of tomorrow. It is too much to expect that it is acceptable as a fact of today. The reality of the motion which our senses see in action-reaction sequences is known as a cycle. All effects in nature are divided into cycles. Cycles means that the pairs which constitute the thinking mind force in nature, compression and expansion, are simultaneously as well as sequentially interchanging with each other in actions and reactions, which always unite as one before they can be repeated. We now look down upon the ground under the trees of the forest. It is a warm day in late fall after days of alternating sunshine and rain. We get down on our knees close to the earth, and here, before our eyes, we see the old tree re-entering its mother's womb. Acorns here and there have found sufficient closeness to the ground of that process. Looking closely at them, we can see a small sprout bending upward to penetrate the mother womb, and another sprout bending upward toward the light of upper earth. We are beholding the great miracle of the resurrection from rest in the soul seed to life in the body. That is nature's rebirth process, her principle of continuity. It matters not whether you call it reincarnation, rebirth, or repetition. The word used as a name for the principle is unimportant. The principle, however, is the most basic of all nature's processes, for it emulates the light wave from which all creation comes into being and into which it returns for reborning. Here, before our eyes, we see the eternal life principle of the cosmic mind universe simulated in the two-way work principle of creation, which man calls life. Man calls it life, for it is dynamic, it moves, it performs work while it moves. When it can no longer move, he must have another name for it, and he calls it death. The word death signifies the end, but nowhere in creation can we find an end to either animal, vegetable, or mineral life. That is an impossibility in nature, for light waves have no ending, and all bodies are combinations of light waves of God's creative thinking. Man's short-sightedness in observing the facts of nature's personalities, the ideas of life in himself and others. He thinks of identity in connection with it and says, John Smith is dead. John Smith's identity has ceased to be. We look at the oak tree above our heads. It has no individual name to distinguish it from other trees in the forest. It is just one oak tree out of thousands, as one rose is but one rose out of thousands. Its identity is collective. It is difficult for man to think of man collectively or as a continuity. The oak over our head is not yet dead, yet its identity is being continued in each one of the sprouting soul seeds we see around us, just as two parents' identities are being continued in their children. Each acorn came from the tree above us. Each is a part of the tree, just as the seed of man and roe of fish are parts of man and fish. Every body which issues from any body is the same body, the same identity. Extension of identities by extension of bodies is a principle of creation. When the tree over our heads can no longer walk, its body disappears into the stillness from which it emerged. But every pulsation of its growth is recorded in its centering soul seed, which surrounds a point of stillness in God's mind universe, from which rebirth of that oak takes place when conditions are made favorable for it. How can we say the tree is dead when that part of it which shed the seed disappears? We see many extensions of that tree around us in sapling forms, as well as those which are now sprouting. If we came into that same forest 1,000 or 1,000,000 years from now, we would still not see extensions of every tree in it if nature or man did not destroy its needed conditions for growth. This foregoing lesson is but one step toward telling you of the reincarnation, or rebirth, or repetitive principle of nature. There are many other steps to take to satisfy those many perfectly natural objections which people raise who do not understand God's ways and processes. These are the questions which doubters continually ask. 1. If I come back in another body, why do I not remember who I was in my prior bodies? Or 2. If people extend themselves through their seed and they never have children, why is not that the end of them? Or 3. If people extend themselves through their children, why is that a great celebrity may have dull children? Or 4. Many people believe that we are punished for sins by coming back as a lower animal. Is that true? The most unanswerable of all such questions, even by the greatest believers, is 5. If reincarnation is a principle of nature, how is it there can be over 2 billion souls on earth now, and there were perhaps only 50 million 3,000 years ago? If souls grow older, where do enough old souls come from for the ever-increasing billions? All of these questions are convincingly answered when one has greater comprehension of God's way of constructing his universe. Man is far from knowing the physical universes as yet, and still farther from knowing the spiritual one, and still farther from knowing himself. We must continue to take one more step at a time toward this needed greater comprehension of ourselves and our universes, which will forever eliminate all doubt about your own spiritual divinity and immortality and your physical repetition of body. So the reason that I was interested in reading this is that I found it very interesting whenever Walter Russell or Lao Russell would refer to their death, they would talk about as refoldment, when Walter refolded. And I wanted to know what they meant. And I wanted to understand if there's an understanding of this refoldment. So I don't necessarily agree with Lao Russell. There's an implication here that we only are reincarnated through our children. I don't quite understand that. There is an implication here that we have access to the knowledge of the universe through this light, and that we are all actually one God, and that we are extensions of that God. Still, I would say that this description is not apt from what we have just read. So you could look at this as, hey, we all extend, life moves on. But I want to know if the individual soul, with all of its memories, can move on. As Drunvalo Melchizedek says, true immortality is memory. So I do believe that we can become immortal with memory over time through access to this eternal light. As a part of this fluctuation, the fluctuation grows and there's larger periods of compression and expansion. We are in the smaller period, and that expansion and compression period will increase. That is my belief. When I read this, I get the impression she's saying, oh, it's just like the seed from the tree. The seed will grow again. That's the tree reincarnated. And no, that's a new tree. That tree is not the old tree. It has the same blueprints of a tree, but each tree is individual in its own right. And I think that's how man is. We are all individuals, and we all carry a certain unique individual essence and signature. And I do believe that there is a system to it, and I want to explore it further. I think we might explore Manly P. Hall, but this is one way to start. This is a scientific view of death. And so if you are in the process of thinking death is nothingness, at least go to this and you can understand that nothingness does not mean death. There is this fear when I talk to some people that death is just the void, the nothingness. That is where all of life exists. We don't know. We just know that we live in this body, and we are held into this body by the pulsations that we have of the heart. But when we move out of it, it's the stillness and the silence, the vast space between where the life exists. Whether or not we are one individualized life, or all of life, or going through stages moving towards that one life, it is still up for us to understand and know. And through deep meditation, we can access information about this that may not be truly explainable for us, which is indicated by these writings, that we may not really ever truly understand this at the level that we're at now. It's like trying to explain what a mountain is to an ant. It's just one of those complex things that an ant will probably never understand, and an ant will never have to walk up the mountain, but we can. So I believe there are levels to this, and I believe that we are moving through levels. In my own experience and understanding the law of one, I really strongly believe in my heart that we're moving through levels of consciousness and moving and expanding in our levels of consciousness, moving toward the one creator. The one creator wants us to experience his or hers true consciousness of the universe, and is taking us through stages in understanding itself, because we are all the one creator at the same time. We are God, and God split himself into trillions upon bajillions of different souls, and each one to uniquely experience itself and understand it from a different perspective, because this is a relative universe. It is relative to your experience and perspective. And when these things come together, it becomes something more. But I still don't completely understand it. I'm always reading new information about it. And this is not a religious talk. You don't have to believe in reincarnation. You can use this scientifically to understand that it is possible in the void, in the silence of death. That's where true life is. As Neville Goddard indicates, we're dead now, and we're moving towards life once we die. So I'd love to get your thoughts on this, or a better explanation of what she's talking about, because she is explaining Walter Russell, which is even more complicated to understand. And perhaps it's overly complicated, and perhaps it's not true. There's a lot of other chapters in this, and if I can find more that maybe go into further detail, then I'll go over those. But I'd love to get your impressions, and for you to teach me what you know about reincarnation. What is your theory of how it works? In any case, all episodes of The Reality Revolution can be found at therealityrevolution.com. I'm sending light wave pulsations to everyone that's listening that are carried with bliss, codes of happiness and joy. When you leave this beautiful episode, you will be so happy and joyful. You can feel the codes moving in to the light wave pulsations of your thought and expanding the love within you. And welcome to the Reality Revolution.